Hi, this is Ted. Today I'm going to be talking about Jimmy Swaggart. I listened to a message of his for the first time in like 40 years recently, and only because I had somebody commented saying, why don't you cover Jimmy Swaggart? So I thought, you know what? My early Christian walk, Jimmy Swaggart was a big part of it. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I'll talk a little bit about what he meant to me and why, and some of the lessons I learned from that. But I'm also going to then get into the message that he shared with me. And the first thing I want to say about his message, though, before I move on, is he seemed to go all over the place. In other words, I believe he had about 10 minutes to 20 minutes of material that he had prepared at least 10 minutes or at least 15 minutes for. And after that, he just seems to meander. He goes into a lot of different subjects. He talks about prosperity for those who tithe. And he talks about healing for everybody who belongs to Jesus Christ and who've gone to the cross. He talks about a lot of different subjects. But today I'm going to focus on the one that he started out with, because I believe that's what he intended to start out with. And he probably intended to go the entire distance with this one message, but ran out of things to say after about halfway point, and then continues. Now, as I mentioned, Jimmy Swaggart and I go way back. Not personally, but when I was a young Christian, just born again, I was told rock and roll music is of the devil, get rid of it. So I did. I got rid of all my albums, and I gave up the drugs. I gave up everything. I did really. I gave up pretty much everything. Started new and everything. I had no music to listen to. One of my friends dragged me to a Jimmy Swaggart concert. Hated his preaching. Why? Because he makes you feel bad. You know, it's one of those preachers, they just constantly, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're not doing this enough for God, you're just not good enough. And I didn't need that as a young Christian. I was doing everything in my ability and everything in my power to serve God with my whole heart. So to be told you're not good enough, and that's not good enough, it was not something I needed to hear. Anyway, I kind of blew him off after that, except his music. Why? Because I needed music to go to. And Jimmy Swaggart picked up on a lot of Southern gospel music. And Southern gospel, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of the answer to country music for the Christians. And it was a really good sound, especially for somebody straight out of rock and roll. And so when he hit a few Southern gospel songs, I thought this could be something good, because I only wanted to listen to Christian music, and that was acceptable. Anyway, eventually I got deep into Jimmy Swaggart music and listened to a lot of his music. Well, in 1972, now all that happened in 1971 and the beginning of 72. 1974, I moved to Hialeah, Florida, because that's where I got stationed at an air-sea rescue station. We covered the Bermuda Triangle and other areas. While there, I ended up going to church, an Assemblies of God church, with Jim Rentz, who was the pastor. Jim Rentz was an awesome pastor, very, very great. Him and his wife were just amazing. They took me in. You know, it was a very depressing time for me. I had really no very good close friends. There was this charismatic cult group, and I'm saying cult, that was the first time I ever called any part of the charismatic movement cult, because I had friends in the charismatic movement, but this particular group was so cultish. They lived together in a little commune, and it just was cultish to the core, and a lot of them were people from the station. And so I had a very difficult time with this year and a half, but Jim Rentz and his wife were just awesome to me and stuff. He left that church. I left from there, basically going to Bible school at the end of my Coast Guard career. And he moved on to become the pastor of Jimmy Swaggart's church. So he's the campus pastor, if you would. I get out of school, many years later, I get out of graduate school, and I'm not quite dedicated to become a missionary at this point. And I call up Jim Rentz and I say, hey, listen, do you think Jimmy Swaggart has anybody to hire. And he says, nope, nobody hiring right now. I think he was trying to protect me from the toxic culture going on in the ministry underneath Jimmy Swaggart, to be honest with you. His wife, Jimmy Swaggart, Frances Swaggart, took over as controlling pretty much everybody over the teams serving him. But Jim Rance said, nope, nothing going on here, which is fine, which is good, because then I was on to another school and eventually become a missionary with my wife in very healthy places to go, etc., etc. Now to Jimmy Swaggart. Jimmy Swaggart is cousin to Jerry Lee Lewis, the big rock star. And he and Jerry used to hang out together all the time. They used to watch the dance halls. They used to go to dance halls, not inside, but they'd watch from outside as kids. And evidently this had big influence, not only on Jerry Lee Lewis, but on Jimmy Swaggart as well. Jerry Lee Lewis got the music from there. Jimmy Swaggart got a desire for women or something from there, watching the people dance around. He fought temptation. Even as a young teen, he fought the fornication temptation. It just seemed to hound him down. It seemed to be something he could never gain control over. He actually had an obsession with it. He'd talk about rock and roll being the fornication of gospel music. He would write I don't know, I would say books, but I only saw one. I was in Brussels, Belgium, learning French in order to go to the Congo as a missionary. And while there, I was in a bookstore and I saw a book by Jimmy Swaggart. I said, oh, this is interesting, and opened it up. It's all about fornication. So he was obsessed with fornication. He had all kinds of stuff going on in his own life, trying to expose people who, like Jim Baker, who were involved in fornication, involved with having extramarital sex. And he also was very instrumental in getting, in fact, he was the main person to get Pastor Gorman, Marvin Gorman, a fellow pastor in his area of Louisiana, and getting him out of the ministry and exposed for having affairs. So he was really on top of that kind of stuff. Now, in Africa, in the Congo, 1988, I'm talking to a friend of mine, and Jimmy Swaggart, I no longer listen to his music. I no longer, at that point, never listened to his preaching. But I'm talking to some guy, and I'm saying, I'm noticing that pastors and people who talk a lot about certain subjects have an issue with it. I call it looking through the beam. In other words, you have a beam in your own eye, and you can see the specks in everybody else's eyes because you see through the focus of a beam. And I was talking about that with a friend of mine in the Congo, and I said, but I don't think Jimmy Swaggart would ever do that, even though he talks so much about fornication. Simply, in my mind, I'm thinking he's too big. Maybe I'm thinking God always rewards people with big ministries who are very dedicated. I don't think that was part of it, but it could have been subconsciously part of it. But I think more so, if you have a ministry that important, he had the largest ministry in the world at that time. If you have a ministry like that that's so important, you're going to want to treasure it. You're going to want to serve God as well as you can, and you're not going to get yourself involved with stupid things like prostitutes and other things that would destroy your ministry. Well, Marvin Gordon found out that Jimmy Swaggart was visiting a prostitute at a certain hotel, and so he took pictures, got somebody to take pictures, exposed Jimmy Swaggart. And the Assemblies of God stepped in because Jimmy Swaggart was Assemblies of God, and they said, you're out for 3 months. Okay, for 3 months he didn't. Jim Rance, my ex-pastor, he went up and took charge. 3 months are up. Jimmy Swaggart says, nope, I will not go any further than 3 months because Assemblies of God now asks him to go for 2 years out and get counseling. Well, he doesn't want secular counseling. He doesn't want Christian counseling. He doesn't want any counseling. Bible's good enough. And so he wants to quit the Assemblies of God. And he does. He leaves the Assemblies of God. Jim Rance is stuck because Jim Rance loves the Assemblies of God. He's loyal to it. He's dedicated to it. But for temporarily, he has to leave it because he follows in step with the leader that he's under, Jimmy Swaggart. Well, several years later, 1991, Jimmy Swaggart gets busted again with a prostitute. Porn all over his car. Magazines. He's trying to stuff those under the seat so the cop doesn't see it. And the cop sees him moving around all over the place, wiggling around all over in his car, and pulls him over and finds out that he's with this prostitute. He gets busted again. Jim Runt says, "All right, Jimmy Swaggart, you're fired." Jimmy Swaggart says, "Not me, you're fired." And Jim Runt's got things back right with the Assemblies of God, and he became a traveling evangelist. Now, as I mentioned before, when you're looking through the beam, you see one thing, and you will focus on that one thing over and over and over again. And you know, back in the day, he spoke a lot about fornication. Why? Because that is what he struggled with. I want you to keep that in mind. Simply because for the first message that I hear in 40 years from Jimmy Swaggart, so I can cover this and share something with you, this is what I find out. This is the message I heard.
The Spirit of God came over me, and I literally began to sob. I don't mean just weep, I mean sob. He said, "My people," and I'm speaking of those who truly love God, "my people are slaves today to the sin nature. And as the children of Israel were slaves to Pharaoh, that's the condition in which my people now find themselves." It shook me. Lord, it couldn't be that bad, but it is that bad. Let me say it again. The children of Israel were slaves to Pharaoh. They were not just indentured servants, they were slaves.
This is Ted. You all have a good day.